On October 13, 1884, something happened inside the Vatican that would quietly echo through more than a century of human history. It was an ordinary morning. Mass had just ended. The candles were still burning. The marble floors still reflected the golden light from the chapel. But within minutes, silence would turn into something else. Something far darker. Pope Leo XIII suddenly stopped. He froze. Witnesses said his face drained of color. His eyes locked forward, not looking at anyone in the room, but at something unseen. Something no one else could hear. For nearly 10 minutes he stood motionless. Then he collapsed. What he claimed to have heard would become one of the most disturbing religious accounts ever recorded inside the Vatican. And to this day, people still debate what truly happened. Chapter 1. The man before the vie civile. Before we understand the event, we must understand the man. Pope Leo XIII was not a mystic known for dramatic visions. He was intellectual, strategic, political. A reformer navigating one of the most unstable periods in European history. The late 19th century was chaotic. Empires were rising and collapsing. Industrialization was reshaping society. Socialism was spreading. Nationalism was growing. The church was losing political control. Leo XIII was fighting ideological battles, not spiritual apparitions, which makes what happened next even more unsettling, because this was not a man prone to hysteria, not a dreamer, not a fanatic. He was calculated, measured, rational, and yet something shook him to his core. Chapter 2. The triumvirate according to accounts from those closest to him. After Mass, Leo XIII suddenly heard two voices, one harsh, one calm. One filled with pride, the other sovereign and steady. The harsh voice allegedly said, "I can destroy your church." The calm voice responded, "How much time?" The answer, 75 to 100 years, and more power over those who will serve me. Permission was granted. The vision ended. Leo XIII reportedly heard the voice of Satan boasting that he could destroy the church if given more influence and time. Whether symbolic or literal, the message was clear. A century of intensified darkness. A test of humanity. A battle for souls. Chapter 3. The immediate reaction when the Pope regained strength, he did something unusual. He did not call a political meeting. He did not write a public declaration. Instead, he immediately composed a prayer. A prayer to Saint Michael the Archangel. A prayer asking protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. He ordered it to be recited after every low mass around the world. This was not symbolic. This was defensive. Something had convinced him that a spiritual conflict had intensified, and he believed humanity needed protection. Chapter 4. The 100-year TOY. Here is where the mystery deepens. If the vision occurred in 1884, add 100 years. You arrive at 1984. Now, look at the timeline. World War I, World War II, the rise of totalitarian regimes, genocides, nuclear weapons, the Cold War, moral revolutions, cultural upheaval, the sexual revolution, the decline of institutional religion, the explosion of secular ideologies. Some believers argue the 20th century was the most violent and transformative century in recorded history. Was that the time referenced in the vision? Coincidence? Or something more? Chapter 5. Symbolism, or supernatural? Skeptics argue the account was exaggerated. There is no official Vatican transcript of the conversation. Much of the story comes from later testimonies. Memory evolves, legends grow, details shift, and yet, the prayer of St. Michael was undeniably written. It was undeniably mandated, and Leo XIII never publicly denied the experience. Was it a literal auditory event? A mystical vision? A symbolic internal realization? Or the psychological stress of leading a global church during political collapse? History offers no definitive answer, only layers of interpretation. Chapter 6. The modern era fast forward to today. The church continues to face crisis, scandals, declining attendance, moral debates, cultural fragmentation, faith competing with technology, algorithms shaping belief, attention replacing contemplation. Some believers claim we are still within that allowed time. Others argue the prophecy ended decades ago, and some reject the story entirely. But one fact remains. The world changed dramatically in the century following 1884. Violence increased. Ideologies intensified. Human capability expanded for both creation and destruction. Chapter 7. The psychological dimension. There is another layer rarely discussed. What if the vision was less about a literal being and more about human potential? What if power over those who will serve me refers to human susceptibility, to pride, to ambition, to ego, to systems of power, to technological dominance without moral restraint? Perhaps the conversation was a metaphor, a warning about human nature when untethered from conscience. Because history shows something undeniable. The greatest evils of the 20th century were not supernatural monsters. They were human decisions, human systems, human ideologies. Chapter 8 WHY. The story PRSI stories survive for a reason. They speak to fear, to mystery, to uncertainty. The vision of Pope Leo XIII persists because it feels relevant. Every generation believes it stands at the edge of collapse. Every era sees signs of moral decline. Every century believes it is facing unprecedented darkness. But maybe the real power of the story is not in predicting doom. Maybe it is in demanding vigilance. A reminder that good and evil are not abstract forces floating above us. They move through human choices, through systems we build, through culture we shape. Final chapter. What do you believe? Was it a literal encounter? A mystical experience? A psychological episode? A symbolic warning? Or a legend amplified over time? We may never know. But what cannot be denied is this. The 20th century reshaped humanity more than any other period before it. And the tension between faith, power, morality, and ambition continues today. The question is not whether Satan was given 100 years. The question is, what do we do with the time we are given? Chapter. The silence inside the Vatican. And one of the most intriguing aspects of this story is not the vision itself, but the silence that followed. There was no dramatic public declaration, no official Vatican document detailing the conversation, no theological investigation made public. Instead, there was a prayer, and then quiet. Why? The Vatican is known for documentation, for preserving records, for analyzing mystical claims carefully. Yet in this case, the narrative survives mostly through testimony, through secondary accounts, through recollections from those who claim to be present. Some historians argue this weakens the credibility. Others argue the opposite. They claim that silence sometimes protects something too controversial to formalize. If the Pope truly believed that darkness had been granted a century of influence, would announcing that publicly cause panic? Or would it empower faith? That tension may explain why the story remained partially veiled. Chapter. The prayer that lasted decades, the prayer to St. Michael, was not minor. It was mandated worldwide. After every low mass, for decades, millions of Catholics recited, "Defend us in battle." This was not symbolic poetry. It was framed as spiritual warfare. And then something interesting happened. In 1964, the mandatory recitation of the prayer was removed during liturgical reforms. Almost exactly 80 years after the vision, Some believers find that timing unsettling, others see it as coincidence. But symbolism matters in religious history, and timing often fuels interpretation. Was the removal administrative? Or did church leadership believe the period of intensified trial had passed? No official explanation connects the two, yet the pattern continues to fuel debate. Chapter: The century of ideologies. The 20th century did not only bring war, it brought ideologies that reshaped morality. Communism redefined economic systems. Fascism centralized power under authoritarian control. Nationalism intensified identity conflicts. Scientific advancement accelerated without always answering ethical questions. The atomic age introduced existential risk. For the first time in history, humanity could extinguish itself entirely. This was new, unprecedented. Some theologians argue that the true power referenced in the vision was not supernatural possession, but systemic influence over governments, over education, over culture,